In the beginning of the Marvel Universe, there was a word, and the word was Galactus. Hey, welcome to the first episode of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Multiverse. I'm Flonzo.
And I am Jimmy.
And yeah, thanks for being here on our first episode. It's a little bit about our channel. We're here to talk about all the crazy and wild universes within the comic book multiverse. Our first batch of episodes are going to be focused on the Marvel Universe, and what better way to start than the very dawn of the Marvel Universe? So, we also are going to be getting into things like the creators of the Marvel Universe, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby.
Love it. Can't wait. Exciting.
Excellent. So, yeah, let's jump into those two. Now, if you're listening to this, you've probably heard of Stan Lee before, right? So, I'm thinking that, let's start with him. So, when he's 15, Stan Lee wins the biggest news of the week contest 3 weeks in a row at the New York Herald. And they're telling him, dude, you're winning over and over. And at least the way he tells it, they told him, you got to stop entering this thing, but you're going to be a great writer someday. So he was thinking, well, I want to get into publishing. I need to be this great writer. And it was his uncle, through marriage's brother-in-law, Martin Goodman. You familiar with Martin Goodman at all?
I'm not. But you know what I am familiar I'm curious about, Flonzo's.
Yeah.
Is this competition of big news.
So my what I understand it to be is it was like a competition to see which kid could come up with the best news story, and they'd publish it.
He's like a regular Peter Parker.
He is the original Peter Parker.
He's the OG Peter Parker with big news.
And speaking of the original Peter Parker, what do you know about the original The Thing, Jack Kirby?
Gosh, I mean, other than he was the artist.
Yeah, he was definitely pretty much the classic combo. Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, exception like Spider-Man and Doctor Strange. Anything you're thinking about of Stan Lee writing, Jack Kirby was drawing.
Yeah.
And this is a dude, he grew up like Bronx, Jewish kid, terrible neighborhood. He has a story about he decided to kind of choose the right path in life after a kid he knew ended up getting shot through the neck, the way he worded it.
What turned me off was I had a friend of mine who was shot in the neck, and I saw his mother grieve over that. I saw his father gamble away the week's work, and I saw his mother jump off the roof.
So this is a kid who was living the rough and tumble lifestyle. And part of what made him a big comic book artist to begin with is he was the first, comic book artist who really knew how to throw a punch and made it look like they were throwing their weight into it. You look at some of the early comics before, you just have a guy, his arms straight out, that's a punch. But he knew how to draw a punch. He knew, what that rough and tumble lifestyle looked like.
That's interesting. I didn't think about this concept of kinesthetic motion in comics before Marvel and DC and those comics where it was the whams, the pows, and the more descriptive types of movement. But that's interesting. I couldn't even in my mind envision that before that.
Yeah, and he's the guy who threw the punches, so he knew how to draw them being thrown.
Nice.
So he ends up he works for Marvel Comics at the time. It's called Timely Comics because it was a timely time apparently. He's working with the editor-in-chief, who is really a role model for him, Joe Simon. They create Captain America, creates a sensation. People...
Real quick, how old was he at this time?
Ooh, that is an excellent question. That it's a good thing we kidnapped that Flonzo from Universe 318, who knows everything about comics. What do you have to say about this? Wait, did you just say you guys kidnapped me? You told me it was an accident that brought me here. Yeah. We were just wondering. Talk about Jack Kirby and Stan Lee. How old were they when they met? Stan Lee was just 18. He was barely an adult, and Jack Kirby was 23. He was a little bit older. And what about Joe Simon? How old was he at that time? Joe Simon would have been 27. Wait, you guys said you kidnapped me and brought me here? Yeah, dude, we're making a podcast right now, so if you could give us a little space, thanks. So yeah, Joe Simon's working with Jack Kirby. Jack Kirby is definitely older than Stan Lee when he gets his job from his uncle through marriage's stepbrother, who he was the guy who was running Timely Comics at the time.
Timely Comics at the time.
Jack Kirby's like, who's this kid who's not taking life seriously, just playing his recorder off? World War II happens. Pretty much everyone goes off to war. Joe Simon and Jack Kirby, they had kind of left to do their thing. Pretty much the only person they're hiring at this time, who is off at the war himself, is Stan Lee. So when Jack Kirby comes back in the 70s, Stan Lee's editor-in-chief. He's the big boss, this punk kid. So the way Jack Kirby tells it, he takes credit for bringing superhero comics back just in general. And certainly to Marvel, I think he has a solid argument that it was kind of his idea. He talks about having a character he presents Stan Lee with as the Spider. Again, I feel like I am very much that dude in his 30s, like ragging on Stan Lee, which I remember being a teenager hearing those guys being like, but he's such a great writer. And he is. I'm not trying to shortchange that. Also worth remembering, Jack Kirby himself said everyone's promoting themselves out there. So I think he was doing that just like Stan Lee, who was very good at that, was doing. So yeah, those are the sort of our universe, how the Marvel Universe was created. Let's get into the creation of the Marvel Universe from the perspective of the Marvel Universe.
So real quick, Flonzo, before we dive too much in, Can you talk a little bit about like the format of the show and how you kind of are anticipating like each episode to look with, we're going to be reading different issues of comics and discuss them. What's that going to look like?
What I'm thinking is like any background information at the beginning, kind of like we were talking about just then, and then get into like a breakdown, kind of issue by issue.
Hell yeah. What are we reading today?
So the first issue that we have is Supervillain Classic #1, also the last issue of Supervillain Classic, which is Galactus: The Origin.
Wait, so it was the first and last?
Yeah, it's the only...
The Alpha and the Omega?
Yeah.
God dang.
In some ways, the way Galactus is the Omega of one cosmos and the Alpha of the next. So, yeah. Like I said, we have different cosmos here. This is kind of the story of the death of the sixth cosmos and the birth of the seventh. Are you familiar with the idea of like the different cosmos?
I'm not. What is that about?
So, the universe we mainly think of as the Marvel universe. Well, if it was before the 2015 Secret Wars story, it's the seventh cosmos, and that's sort of the story of the death of the seventh, beginning of the eighth cosmos. We're going to talk about the end of the sixth, beginning of the seventh cosmos. So the first cosmos is kind of like the original Marvel universe. It starts out as like a universe that is a being unto itself, kind of like the universe is that universe's God, God is that universe's universe.
So there's like a sentience here, right?
Yeah, to each universe.
There's a consciousness.
Yeah, each universe.
Do they know each other?
Not exactly, but we might cover some issues where that comes up at a much later date.
Okay.
Yeah, if you're excited to hear more about these different cosmos, go and shout it down in the comments below. We will definitely get to those episodes eventually, hopefully. Keep this channel going, and we'll keep it going. But yeah, in terms of the different cosmos, so we have that initial cosmos that creates the first life forms, which are called Celestials. And these are like the original beings in the universe. And you're going to see that like in each version of the cosmos, these beings get like sort of less and less godlike as time goes on. So while these Celestials, they're not like as godly as, say, the god that is the first cosmos is a god. They do become some of the most godly universes by the time we get to the seventh Marvel universe.
So who are the Celestials in this issue?
So in this issue, we are not seeing so much of the Celestials, but they may make an appearance towards the end of this episode if you stay tuned. So we get to like the second version of the cosmos, that's where the concept of death is introduced. By the time we get the fourth cosmos, we start to get these archetypes of heroes being born. These guys, they have names like Person Out of Time, who seems a lot like Captain America, Could Be You, that looks a lot like Spider-Man. And we'll kind of address that a little later on in this episode, too. Doesn't come up specifically, but I've got some theories as to what might actually be going on, some explanations that might fill in some gaps between the panels.
Love it. Explanations.
Excellent. Now getting into this episode, like I said, we start out in the seventh cosmos. And it's worth noting, actually, that all of these panels, all of these the majority of this issue is coming from explanations mainly that came from Thor comics that were kind of pieced together by some other writers, other artists doing like fill-in panels here and there.
Wait, say that one more time?
So the majority of this comic actually came from various issues of Thor, where Thor was first learning about Galactus, and Galactus explained to him his origin.
Oh, interesting.
And they took these different bits and pieces, and I'll bring up some panels later on to kind of show how they reuse some of the panels that Stan Lee and Jack Kirby did. So for the most part, these are, this is
like repurposed.
Yeah, exactly. So for the majority of it, this is Jack Kirby's artwork, Stan Lee's words, but there were later writers. Mike Grunwald did the writing and John Byrne did the penciling. John Byrne became famous for doing a lot of X-Men and other comics later on. Actually, probably before they pieced this together. But so they took these various issues and pieced them together for this. So that brings us to the first page, where we see a panel which is repurposed from Thor number 160, where we see Galactus arriving at a place. And when we turn the page, we see that the place he's arrived at is a place he considers home, which is worth considering this. What is home to Galactus? What is this place that he's going back to? Because as we're going to see, his home is from an iteration of the multiverse that does not exist anymore.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting to think about. What is the nascent origin of Galactus? I'm curious to see where this issue takes us.
Yeah, let's see. So we turn and we see Galactus's home. His home on a now dead paradise called Ta, as he puts it. And you can really see Jack Kirby's artwork here. It's a great cityscape. You see some very like Jack Kirby-esque costumes on these figures, this very futuristic city, which I know earlier you described it as a way of being very classic and very modern at the same time.
Yeah, so when I was looking at this, it very much reminded me of that like retro futuristic aesthetic where there was just a lot of verticality. Everything kind of had this kind of vibe of what will the world of tomorrow look like, right? While also having kind of this like ancient old world feel to it.
Yeah, and it's definitely worth noting that Jack Kirby, he was really into the idea of the book Chariots of the Gods, which a lot of people today would say is like Ancient Aliens kind of stuff, where he thought that, these ideas of gods came from encounters with aliens in the past, just like a lot of the Ancient Alien stuff today. Some of the people who knew him debated how much he really believed all that, but it's definitely something he liked to talk about and think about. And it came through in a lot of his artwork, if you think about how Asgard's depicted in a lot of these Thor comics, how it's kind of science-y, but kind of fantasy at the same time. And with Galactus in particular, it's worth thinking about. We'll get into that a little later, but that look of him, that way of combining gods and aliens.
Yeah, it very much does kind of like evoke this really like civilization at the pinnacle of like advancement. You know what I'm saying?
Totally.
Like we've hit these big strides and we are kind of not to in a way like there's like this looming sense of like we are at the end of civilization.
Absolutely. Like this is the pinnacle. This is like a place of spiritual and scientific perfection. And as they're flying around on these thought spheres, which, to kind of get into how Jack Kirby and Stan Lee wrote, they'd get together, they'd have a conversation about what they'd write, but then Jack Kirby would draw everything out, and then Stan Lee would go back and write words over them. So, Jack Kirby in this, he drew pictures of people floating around in these bubbles. So Stan Lee, very much the way this is written, strikes me as Stan Lee seeing it and saying, hey, what are these things? I better give them a name. And he calls them thought spheres, which I think really illustrates these don't become important later in the story, right?
No, not at all. But it's clearly important enough for them to acknowledge them overtly and then name them for us, the readers, to internalize this concept of the thought sphere, which is, it seems like a great way to travel.
Right? Yeah. How they're formed through their thoughts, controlled by their thoughts.
Yeah, it's like the things from Jurassic Park, like maybe more advanced. I don't know.
Those Jurassic World bubbles they're traveling around.
Yes. Yep.
So first dinosaurs, then we get the thought sphere.
That's right. This is just like the most advanced iteration of Jurassic Park is where Galactus is from.
So, dinosaurs are not the only threat on Ta. As we see, his name is Galen, this young, very human-looking person, this early Galactus, who's coming back from a mission, and you can really hear some of... a lot of times Stan Lee's language gets called pseudo-Shakespearean, and you can absolutely, see why people say that when you see some of this dialogue.
You do not speak.
I cannot speak. Of what use are words at a time like this, a time of dread catastrophe? The molecules, the very atoms of our universe are changing. It's as we feared. The world of Ta, the universe itself, is doomed. I have been to the furthest end of the cosmos, but my journey was in vain. Our world is the last in existence. Yeah, so you can really see where that, young kid who thought he was going to be the great American writer, how he brought that energy to his writing when he was in comics.
It's all very dramatic and kind of in your face and
over the top, but in a way that's almost fun.
Very fun. Yes. Yeah. Because I mean, and what you see when you read this issue is they are facing this existential threat. It's a society facing this threat of this incoming imminent plague, right? You want to talk about that?
Yeah, so we've got this plague. So Galen's just come back. He's found that this plague, this, radiation event is killing all life in the universe. He's saying our planet is the last one left. They go to a screen. He's seeing these various alien races die. And as you noted earlier, when we were talking about this, these are really well fleshed out races, just from these single panel issues we get. You can see these, winged men with these very particular outfits, with very particular architecture in the background.
Yeah, it was crazy to see, the amount of work that Jack Kirby put into just this one panel in this issue where... so much of it is that concept of show don't tell, right? Where you can see there's just these vibrant cultures that are falling prey to this this plague, right? And so it's just my initial question when Flans and I were talking about this earlier was, gosh, were these actual other comics or series, or is this referencing something else that maybe I had not read before? And I don't know that it necessarily was, but it's really cool, and I think it adds to the kind of lore and scope of what's in this particular issue.
Yeah, we're really sensing what was lost when the sixth iteration of the Cosmos died out here.
Yeah.
And, it seems the way this is paced, it seems like almost instantaneously, this last world has been hit with this plague. And, you see these people who are just dropping like flies as the last few surviving people say, hey, we need to preserve society. We got to go to, how did they word it? The terminal point of the universe, right. Which made me think, what is the terminal point of the universe? Yeah. I was looking at some scientific articles, and they were saying it's the edge of the universe. but that doesn't really make sense in this context. So I guess the place where the universe will be terminated last?
Possibly, right? Or is it like terminal of like an airport terminal? Like that's a gate to another universe? I don't know.
Maybe this is like the terminal where...
Right.
I don't know. I mean, that would make sense based on what's happening next, but I don't know that it seems like they feel that way as like the other people on this ship start dying out one by one until the only person left is Galen, the man to be Galactus. And so...
The bald, white, Lex Luthor-looking man.
Who would have known the last surviving man was some bald white guy?
He's so important.
I mean, truly, as you will see, he is the last one to survive as the last planet dies and everyone else, is wiped out aside from him, who kind of gets this energy form as the universe dies. And then all of a sudden he hears this voice of this godlike being, this incarnation of the universe saying, "Hear me, last son of Tar. I am the sentience of the universe. Like yourself, I'm dying. In mere moments, as I mark time, I shall have drawn all the matter in the cosmos into my bosom and collapse beneath my own abysmal weight. But though we both must die, we need not die without an heir. Come, surrender yourself to my fiery embrace, and let us become as one. Let our death throes serve as birth pangs for a new life form. In a time beyond time shall be born a new universe, and into that universe there shall be one entity like no other. A living organism who possesses the matchless power and raging appetite of a galaxy. He shall be more than a galaxy. He shall be a galactic ravager. He shall be Galactus." It's really worth noting that the last word that the sixth iteration of the Marvel Universe said before it was destroyed and the seventh incarnation of the Marvel Universe was born was Galactus. The name that echoed out kind of between these panels as one universe dies and another one begins was Galactus. In the beginning of the Marvel Universe, there was a word, and the word was Galactus.
So, Flonzo, real quick, I have a question for you. So there's like cosmic forces in the Marvel Universe, right? There's the Phoenix Force. Can you help me understand like this force that is more or less like embodying Galen or however you want to pronounce his name? Is that similar to the Phoenix Force? Is that like the Cosmo itself, like embedding itself in him? What's happening here?
What's happening here? Like, who's the voice?
Yeah, who's the voice?
So that is the very incarnation of the Six Cosmos.
Oh.
Like, if you think of that as like a godlike being who has just died, but in that he made like this covenant with Galen, with the being that is now Galactus in the seventh cosmos, which the seventh cosmos itself is incarnated as this godlike being known as eternity that represents all that is in this new multiverse. And you want your mind to really be blown here.
Yeah.
Not only is eternity for the multiverse a person, each universe also has its own eternity that is still a part of that most multiversal eternity. Does that kind of...
That's crazy.
Sense? Yeah. Any force has an opposite, right? Yeah. So eternity, this all existence, has a parallel that is death, which is also kind of tied in with oblivion. And so that is the counterpoint force. But when you have these two entities that are opposing each other, you need to have balance somewhere. And that point of balance in this new universe is Galactus.
Interesting. Okay, so he's like the fulcrum point, if it was like the scales of justice.
Yeah, he is that point in the middle, keeping everything in balance.
Is this the same death that is married to Thanos?
Yeah. Well, that Thanos would like to marry, absolutely. And who's also in love with Deadpool, for anyone who's interested in that.
Fucking this universe.
This universe that has just been created as that ship with the now Galactus is flying around, and it flies around for centuries, I believe they say.
Thousands and thousands of years, I think they say.
To the point where, civilizations have developed, including the Watchers. You want to fill me in on what you know about the Watchers?
Yeah. So the Watchers, from my understanding, are kind of these like primordial beings. Their sole purpose is to kind of like watch and record without intervening. And oftentimes, I when I read this stuff, I see like little editorialization from like the people who are writing the comics. You see their little voices come through. So that's the Watchers to me.
Absolutely. And, in terms of like cosmic entities, we see these cosmic entities like, Eternity, Death, Galactus. But the ones who tend to break the fourth wall the most often are beings that are Watchers. Particularly Uatu the Watcher, who's the Watcher of the planet Earth, who's the one who's normally interacting with the characters. Here in this comic, we're seeing a different Watcher named Eki, is the name that he gives in the original Thor comics where these panels are taken from. Eki senses something in this ship, some great power. So as he goes up, he goes into the ship, and he awakens, someone who looks very much like Galen from the sort of stasis he's been in for these early millennia of the universe. And he awakens as this energy being and gets back on his ship, takes off. Next thing we see him creating his suits of armor. And I know you were saying earlier when we were talking that Galen just kind of looked like, it's Galactus without his suit. But then we see he's this being of pure energy. Yeah. In this panel here, what we're seeing is a human hand. Now, something that's interesting to note is that in Fantastic Four 262, it was stated that every civilization sees Galactus differently. They look and they see some different entity.
Interesting. So, like, the bird people, for example, from, like, the previous panel, right?
Yeah.
They would have saw, like, Bird Galactus?
Yeah, if they were to come to the seventh cosmos and see Galactus, they'd see some more bird-like being.
That's crazy. Do they ever show that in the comics? Have you ever seen that?
Yeah. There's actually a very specific panel, like I said, in 262, which part of the reason I looked into that is I actually always thought that panel was from this issue. So, like, when I finished this, I was like, where's that panel from if it's not there? And then, so I sought it out.
That's crazy.
And, which also I do think because he had that human form and was there for that death of the universe, that might be why everyone looks so, we have so many human-looking creatures walking around.
Right. Which, wild to think about that, again, where comics are such a fun medium, we as the observers, like the humans reading the comics.
Yeah, so in this panel, we are seeing this human hand of this human Galactus, because that's how we perceive Galactus to look. Yeah. After he takes that form, he creates his outfit, he morphs his spaceship into this more cube-like thing, and orbits this planet for, several more millennia. And as time goes on, they become more advanced. They decide to investigate what's on this ship and eventually end up unleashing the World Eater, this fully formed, what we think of when we think of Galactus. And he comes down and completely obliterates the planet. He destroys them. He turns them into a group called the Wanderers, who later encountered Thor and created the original version of a lot of these panels we see towards the end here, including the panel on page, it's 22 on Marvel Unlimited, where we actually see the ruins of this civilization. We see Galactus coming down, and I think it's really interesting to see how they sort of were able to edit the previous panel when Thor was in this ruined world for this new comic.
Yeah, that's crazy. So this the panel, what you're saying was also in a Thor comic, and then they edited it, changed the colors, added some additional assets for this.
Yeah, and even took away some things to make it, more balanced and let Galactus coming down look a little better. So it shows some of the real creativity you can have with this kind of project. And then we get to the penultimate page where we see, the modern day ship that Galactus is in, which is actually the only one of these panels that wasn't from those Thor comics where Thor had first met Galactus. It was from a issue of Fantastic Four that we'll be covering pretty soon here, where Galactus first appears. So, what'd you think of this issue?
I thought it was great, man. I had long known who Galactus was as just kind of like this general character. More of this like cosmic event, this person that would become the threatened to eat the world, heralded by the Silver Surfer, but didn't know a ton about his origin story or the specifics around the circumstances that would create like a cosmic being like this. So it was awesome to read. It was super cool. And I think it gives you more insight into the just kind of like general like fabric and nuance of like how do they make gods in the Marvel universe.
So one thing that might come interesting to a lot of our listeners out there, a lot of our viewers, if you watch us on YouTube or we're originally putting this up, is the fact that the 92 X-Men animated series also led to the creation of the Marvel Universe.
That's wild.
If you're listeners, you probably know who the X-Men are. I think it was Grant Morrison. I wasn't able to actually find this quote anywhere, who called it a soap opera about a paramilitary school for the weird kids. And it's basically the story of a bunch of, persecuted people born with superpowers known as mutants. You don't really have to know any of that for the story we're about to tell. But what is worth noting is how kind of batshit crazy it is that something so significant with so many implications to the Marvel Universe was written to the tie-in comic to a cartoon from the 90s, which, great cartoon. It's probably what got me into comics. Did you ever watch the 92 X-Men cartoon at all?
I love the 92 X-Men cartoon.
Yeah, great cartoon.
That and Batman the animated series were like my gateways to comic.
Amazing cartoons.
Yeah. But to what you're saying, like, tie-in comics generally were not like so substantive that they were like impacting the storytelling or the existing universes in substantial ways.
Exactly, and like some, like the Batman tie-in comics, there were at least other stories in that universe typically. These comics you had 3 volumes of a comic called X-Men Adventure that was just straight up adapting episodes of the TV show into comics. It wasn't even original ideas. Then you get what we're going to read is talk about is the last couple of episodes or issues of this tie-in comic that was just stories set in the universe of the other comics that were adaptions of the 90s X-Men cartoon.
Right. That were not even continuations of stories that comic had done.
Yeah.
They were like progressing the Marvel universe in insane ways.
It's a weird comic to exist, period, right? Like set in the universe of comic adaptations of a TV show. So that's what we're coming into for these universe spanning or universe defining events. Yep. I'm going to start out with issue number 11, which starts with 2 of the X-Men, Jean and Storm, are teleported into the Florida swamps. And they are immediately set upon by some swamp folk who think they have something to do with some tower, that they hate this tower, so they're coming after them. In no time at all, they are saved by the being known as Man-Thing.
Classic Man-Thing appearance.
Yeah, classic Man-Thing appearance. So what do you know, Jimmy, about the giant-sized Man-Thing?
Honestly, Flonzo, I know close to nothing about giant-sized Man-Thing other than he's very similar to Swamp Thing, and I don't know who came first.
So this was something I actually made notes of that I wasn't necessarily going to talk about, but that is an interesting story. Len Wein and Jerry Conway, who were the writers of Swamp Thing and Man Thing, respectively, insist that they had no idea what the other was doing. They also happened to be roommates at the time.
It's real like Dennis the Menace situation.
Yeah, but like they're roommates. It's they do say that it was like they both came up with the idea, and it's possible it was the same influences. I know Roy Thomas, who was the artist on one of those, I believe it was Roy Thomas, was really into an older comic called The Heap, who a lot of people think just kind of influenced both of them. That's another thing, is he was like some mystical origin. Both Swamp Thing and Man Thing, there was like a serum. I know with Swamp Thing it was like a plant growth serum, and it was a similar thing with Man Thing. They do go over his origin in a one-panel spread in this comic. For his one appearance in this tie-in to a comic adaptation of the 90s X-Men show. But he comes in, he saves the day real quick, and kind of wanders back into the swamp to make an appearance a little later on.
So question, had Man Thing appeared in the X-Men animated series at that point?
Nope, this is his first appearance in anything resembled this version of the universe.
First and only, maybe?
Yeah, no, completely first and only.
Wow.
Yeah, he's a good character. If you guys would like to see us cover his Steve Gerber, his run on the series, I would love to do that at some point. Let us know in the comments, because, yeah, I would love to cover those. Also, his comic was where the character Howard the Duck first appeared, because he is known as the guardian of the Nexus of Worlds, which exists in this Florida swamp. Speaking of Nexi of Worlds...
Regular Florida man.
Yeah, no, it was definitely a group of Florida men who came, but they were really worried that they might be tied into this tower somehow.
When you say tower, what do you mean?
We'll get to that briefly, but it does have to do with the Nexus of Realities in Florida, much like the Nexus of Realities that exists in the form of the M-Cron Crystal. I've known about the M-Cron Crystal since that 90s X-Men show, but when I realized we were doing a podcast, it dawned on me, what is the M-Cron Crystal? Yeah. And the M-Cron Crystal is also called a Nexus of Realities, and it is actually a crystal that exists simultaneously in every single universe in the multiverse. And if any one of those are destroyed, all of them are destroyed, because they're just like a multi-dimensional like facet of this same gem. So Lalandra, who is the Empress of the Shi'ar Empire, which is galaxy-spanning empire, one of what's largely considered the top three sort of galactic empires, at least in the Earth part of the universe.
Very bird-like people.
Yeah. It's sort of like, what if birds had evolved into humans is kind of the take on them. They look way less bird-like than those people who died in the previous comic.
Yeah, no, not literal birds, but bird-like.
Yeah, bird-like. They have feathers instead of hair. And one of them, the Empress of them, Princess Lalandra, has traditionally been a lover of the leader of the X-Men, Charles Xavier. All that exposition just to say that she has contacted the X-Men saying that there are cracks appearing in the M-Cron Crystal and she needs their help. Flashing back to Florida, where we have Storm and Jean, wandering to the nearby city of Citrusville, which, looking into it, is a city that does not exist in the real world, but apparently is an established part of, like, Man-Thing lore.
Citrusville's my favorite part of Man-Thing lore.
I mean, I feel like it has more of like a bitter sour kind of taste than a citrus flavor, but
I don't know what kind of Man-Thing lore you're sucking on.
Anyway, so there's a bunch of people gathered around a Man-Thing-like man whose name is Mr. Silverton, and he claims that they've been noticing everyone in this town is just super, super depressed. And you have this guy who's standing inside of like this little like obelisk, those Egyptian obelisks, kind of like the Washington Monument kind of thing, a small one in this town. And he's saying how he is the only one who can help them. He's the only one who can save them. Then he turns into this demon and calls himself Despair. And suddenly that little obelisk is a giant tower. And he's like, joke's on you. I'm a demon, and this thing only gives you misery, but your only salvation is to submit to it. And the people who seem like they're under some kind of spell, though, there is some, I'm not going to say good, but somewhat poignant references to believing someone who just tells you they have the solution to all your problems. And even when the salvation from their despair turns into submitting to the despair, the people are like, well, it's the only way. Our lives mean nothing if they can't be sacrificed to this tower of despair. Yeah, of despair, the demon, or of despair that they're feeling. So then you get a battle. Gene's fighting this demonic entity known as Despair.
So is he just called Despair? Is he like the embodiment of despair?
Well, he feeds off of despair. Traditionally, Jean is, as she's fighting him, reads his mind and realizes he's working for someone called the Dweller in Darkness. And despair was created by the Dweller in Darkness from all the despair of the people in Atlantis as it was being destroyed during the Great Cataclysm, which is the great event involving the Celestials. We won't be discussing it as much next episode, but the Celestials destroy Atlantis, and from his despair was crafted this being called Despair, at least within the main Marvel universe. That is Despair's origin. I've got some theories as to what might have been happening there that we'll get to later on. Yeah, so as Jean's battling him, Storm destroys the tower, which then suddenly Despair is feeling, some fear. And another interesting aspect of Man-Thing, who suddenly shows up after all this battle, is Man-Thing really doesn't have a personality. He just vibes off of other people's emotions. Like, he has memories. Jean was able to, see his origin, but he doesn't act on his memories. He just reacts to people's emotions. So if somehow you see this giant mass of moss and swamp goo and are like, oh, cool, he's cool. If you are afraid, he attacks you and burns you with his touch, which is what he does with Despair here. And after doing that, Jean touches his mind one more time and gains something key that I'm assuming he's able to possess, because as the guardian of the Nexus of Realities, he's able to connect with the Emkron crystal, which is also connected as a Nexus of Realities. So it's almost like he's at the Nexus of Realities as a physical location, whereas the Emkron crystal is an embodiment of the Nexus of Realities, and somehow he's able to convey what is needed to Jean in that moment. So from there, they go back to the mansion to figure out where they're going to learn about what they've learned about the Emkron crystal. Okay. Bringing us into the final issue of Adventures of X-Men, the expanded universe of the tie-in comic to the 90s TV show, The X-Men. So we are greeted in this issue with the Watcher, and I'm assuming this is Uatu. It's the typical Watcher who watches over Earth. But this Watcher, he's telling us pretty much everything we kind of went over in that first issue we talked about, that supervillain classic. We learn once again all about Galen and the dying of the universe and how he's setting off. But then we cut back to the X-Men as Jean and Storm are learning about the cracks and the expanding of the Emkron crystal and how this must be stopped. And there's only one thing that they think could save it. And that thing, they tell them, after just teleporting them onto their ship across however many light years, they say that only the Phoenix can save them. Now, you brought up the Phoenix earlier. You seem somewhat familiar with the Phoenix.
Yeah, I mean, Phoenix Force is the thing that lives within Jean Grey, right? It was like this cosmic entity before then.
So it's sort of like the incarnation of all life. Like, all life is kind of connected to the Phoenix. Probably, I'm guessing back to the first Cosmos. When the first Cosmos created the Celestial, there was life and there was a Phoenix Force. Yeah. And like you mentioned, it is kind of a part of Jean Grey because it kind of, while
dormant inside of her.
Yeah. And so it sort of exists, it taps into these individual living beings, typically with strong, psychic powers, mental abilities. You'll see her pop up again next episode we do, in fact. Spoiler alert for the viewer. Come back again.
Please.
But it is this, all-powerful force that, with someone with enough psychic power, can access and embody itself into them. It does not take a physical form without one of the living beings it's connected to, like, say, Eternity sometimes does. In something called an N-body I'm not getting into in this episode. But the Phoenix instead possesses people like Jean Grey, which she allows her to possess her in this instance, which is a little scary because in the past, the Phoenix has been corrupted inside Jean Grey and created planetary genocides and all sorts of not fun things. So she does allow the Phoenix to take her over in order to repair the Omicron crystal. And despite just having being teleported light years away, they decide they're going to get to a ship to fly to the planet with the Omicron crystal. To where we have a cutaway to Despair, this demon we just saw in the previous issue, meeting the Dweller in Darkness, his creator, who's, scolding him for his failures. And it turns out that the Dweller in Darkness has this plan where he's going to destroy the entire multiverse in order to feast on all of their fear. So in the way that Despair feeds on despair, the Dweller in Darkness feeds off of fear. So that's his master plan. He's explaining all this to Despair when suddenly he appears before the living tribunal.
Ooh. Giant galactic three-faced.
Yeah, basically, if there is a threat to the multiverse, not just a universe, in the cosmic scales of justice, universes can live and die, but the multiverse, if there's a threat, the person who perpetuates the threat is brought before the living tribunal, who has 3 separate faces, like you just mentioned, that represent 2 different elements of justice. And those 3 faces are equity, revenge, and necessity. So those are the 3 things that must be placated in order for him to find you innocent or to find you guilty if you've served any one of those unjustly within this ultimate judge of the multiverse. Yeah. So we have a being who is trying to destroy the multiverse. And, for the viewers who haven't put it together yet, this is the 6 cosmos. This is the destruction of the 6 cosmos happening here, with these characters that seem very much like the characters we come to know in the 7th cosmos in the Marvel Universe and the comics and shows and movies we're all familiar with. This is the end of the 6th universe being caused by this version of the Dweller in Darkness, who is also worth saying has been said to have survived the destruction of the 6th cosmos into the 7th cosmos.
Do you know the story behind that?
I don't super well. It's something I came across while I was doing research for this episode. It might even be these events that people say that with, so I'm not 100% sure the full backstory of that. Excellent question. The teacher and me coming out. But so you have these 3 heads. So why, I found myself asking, would this, person allow for the destruction of the multiverse? So equity. We know that basically the new universe is going to be kind of similar. There's some sort of equity there, right? Revenge, we'll also see the Dweller in Darkness does the universe gets its revenge on him in a way. Necessity. Now, I specifically asked you not to research this, because I'm curious. Before he finds him innocent, he summons 2 beings in his hand, a red and a blue guy fighting. Who do you think they are?
Oh my gosh. I have no idea.
So that is the manifestation of the DC Universe fighting the manifestation of the Marvel Universe.
Really?
Yeah. So Marvel vs. DC is a comic that came out around this time, and when this was made, I am certain this was considered like a promotional thing for that upcoming comic. So essentially what he says is that...
It does look a lot like Superman.
Yeah, when I'm sending Jimmy things, if it's a Marvel comic, it's in blue. If it's DC, it's in red. I actually couldn't find any firm evidence of which universe is which, and I'm not sure if that's ever actually been said. Yeah. But, he says that this is necessary for the grand scheme of things. So essentially what he's saying is he's allowing the 6th iteration of the Marvel Universe to die so that Marvel versus DC can happen.
For promotional purposes. Thank you, Adventures of the X-Men.
Right?
This tie-in comic. Thank you.
A comic that I seriously wonder who this comic was made for in the first place.
Literally.
Which, you know, this made me start asking all sorts of questions. Like, why is this necessary? And yeah, if you guys, another comic I'd love to get into, how we're deciding future episodes. We will be looking at the comments. As we've referenced, there are episodes we're planning on doing, but we really are looking at those comments. We're talking about getting a Patreon going. So what goes up on the Patreon is going to come from this. If you guys are interested in hearing us do a Marvel versus DC deep dive, or talk about the Amalgam universe, which is the comic set into when these were the same universe. And this got me thinking, like, in terms of the Marvel cosmos, like, where would that, like, amalgam, which, if you don't know, is the fusion of the Marvel and DC universe that, according to that comic, to spoil the premise, the Marvel and DC universe at some cosmic time were the same universe. So I'm wondering if that fourth iteration where we had those, you know, you could be anyone, that man out of time, those early archetypes of heroes might have actually been the Amalgam universe. Yeah, so that's my theory, is that when the six cosmos died, and also, you know, Crisis on Infinite Earths might have caused these entities to change when they discovered each other and began to fight at the beginning of Marvel vs. DC.
So what does the Living Tribunal do, Flonzo?
The Living Tribunal says, go ahead, let the universe die, which is, you know, his function is to judge on threats of the multiverse, and he said it's worthwhile so these brothers can meet and fight. Yeah. And we can see who'd win between Wolverine and Lobo. So, meanwhile, back at the planet that houses the M'Kraan crystal, the X-Men arrive and are brought inside, which this is something that happens often. There's a place called the White Hot Room that's connected to the Phoenix and said to be inside the M'Kraan crystal. There's been said to be galaxies inside the M'Kraan crystal, so they go inside to see what's wrong with it. And they see another tower, and they also see invading army of demons, the Nagari, who are like a Nagarai, I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce it. They're established X-Men villains who are said to be one of the older races of demons, so they're invading this crystal, the dead are coming back to life, all these terrible things are happening. So there's a fight, and eventually, in order to overcome all this, the Phoenix, who, as I mentioned earlier, the Phoenix is connected to all life, and she's remembering she needs to do this because of that connection she had to Man-Thing. So she takes that connection of the Man-Thing, who's connected to the Nexus of Reality, that's connected to the M'Kraan crystal. A lot of this is me having to read into things a lot to make a little bit of sense with how all of this is written. But suddenly she reaches out to everything in the life force that is the Phoenix Force to tell them all to be calm and to be accepting and not feed into the fear that the Dweller in Darkness is destroying the multiverse to achieve. Yeah. Which I assume is the revenge that allowed the Living Tribunal's revenge face to be accepting of this destruction of the multiverse. So we see a bunch of different alien races. We see the Skrulls and the Krees, who are kind of the other two major empires in our neck of the universe. We also see the Badoon, who are significant number of Marvel comics. We also see a character I was only vaguely aware of, Archon, who's actually a multiversal being, to show that she's not only connecting to people in our universe, but even people like Archon from other universes, as well as the Man-Thing, who's in a panel that's a little hard to see, just seems to be looking at a snail. So, with this, you know, the X-Men, who are within this nexus of all realities, as it shatters, and shatters with the X-Men within it, and everything dies while being at peace, and the X-Men, I assume, kind of live on within this vision of brotherhood that they were always trying to achieve.
They do this, like, side by side, like, standing next to each other, like, slowly accepting their fates. Yeah. Which, let me just say, so throughout this issue, Gladiator is also there.
He is.
And one thing I found so hilarious about this is, in this panel where everyone's standing side by side, Gladiator is not present.
You know, I did not notice that. I did make the conscious point of, like, not talking about him because he's that level of significant to this story.
They just left him out.
So insignificant that, like...
thought it was very funny.
That is funny. So there's absolute brotherhood, except for
Gladiator. Fuck that guy.
That's really funny. I'm actually looking, because did Lilandra go into the Emkron crystal with them?
I don't think Lilandra goes in.
No, she doesn't.
But what happens is Lilandra's brother, who was the previous leader of the Shi'ar Empire, is in there as a demon.
Yeah, like when the dead are coming back, he is one of the ones who comes back.
Yeah.
Which is the most significant part for Gladiator, because they had a relationship, and Gladiator is not happy to see him back.
Yeah.
To not get too into, it's not our job on this podcast to explain the X-Men. But yeah, so the universe is destroyed. The X-Men continue into the new universe. We get some panels that reference what happened to Galactus, that to your casual reader of the tie-in comic to the comic book adaptations of the animated X-Men show would have no clue what any of these references are. But it talks about, they get that same part with the Galen becoming Galactus. So then we have, this moment between universes, Despair and the Dweller in Darkness talking. Dweller in Darkness is upset that he doesn't have any fear to feed off of, but his fear provides sustenance to Despair. And like I mentioned earlier, it has been said that the Dweller in Darkness survives, so I almost wonder, is it that he survives this encounter with Despair, or does Despair become the new Dweller in Darkness for the new universe and decides when Atlantis is destroyed to use that fear to create a new being like himself?
Oh, that's a great question. That's a great question. That's a fantastic read into it.
And then, we end just with the Living Tribunal. We see Galactus's ship come into the new universe. We see jellyfish evolving into reptiles, evolving into humanity. And then on the last panel, we have the beginning of X-Men #1, and it all comes full circle. So my theory, again, I wanted to save a lot of the reviewing for when we're done with things. This is not nearly as good as the other comic.
No, far from it.
And they are dealing with some very significant factors, so kind of trying to read between, make some sense of things. The X-Men being in the Emkron crystal as it shatters, it might make sense as to why the new universe is so similar to the old one. That at the core of all realities was the X-Men.
I think I had some confusion reading it in just regards to the ending, as was the insinuation that existence is cyclical, like they just started from the beginning of a junction point, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, absolutely, and that does make sense. And I know some of the Thor comics have talked about how that's true of Asgard, so why not be true of Midgard as well? Yeah. Midgard being Earth to those less Thor inclined out there.
Those less worthy.
So I guess with that, we are into the 7th iteration of the Marvel Universe.
Galactus exists. The X-Men are nascent.
Exist in the dust. And really, other than that, before the void that existed before the dawn of the 7th iteration of the Marvel Universe, one we're so familiar with, was a being known as Null, who's most famous for creating the symbiotes. And he existed in that nothingness before the universe, and he saw when the light burst through and those Celestials from that first incarnation of the universe burst through, and he even decapitated one of them for disturbing his domain, creating the planet known as Nowhere. But these beings, called the Celestials, spread throughout the universe until one of them landed on Earth and changed the future forever. Tune in next time to see what happens.
See you then.
Thank you.